that right now regulators releases the rules in the regulations, but ideally they also have to release the models which will carry the understanding of those regulations, because understanding of the regulations is something which other companies have to produce for themselves by like assigning people or hiring people who will read all of this stuff.
Welcome to the Innovation and Compliance Podcast, part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Join us every week as we talk with industry innovators who are making compliance to help business run more efficiently and at the end of the day, more profitably. Here's your host, Tom Fox.
And now, a word from our sponsor, Clausematch. This podcast is presented by Clausematch, an award-winning global regtech helping organizations operate safely and bring compliant products to the market. Clausematch's AI-powered mapping and tagging platform uses advanced metadata, allowing companies to better manage documents so they can quickly adapt to new changes and new regulations. For more information or to book a demo, go to clausematch.com. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and we are in for a real treat today because we rarely get breaking news on innovation and compliance. But today we have some really breaking news, and I think it is going to be applicable for a wide variety of industries, of companies, of governments across the globe. So with that teasing introduction, first of all, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Tom. Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, first, like to ask you guys to introduce yourselves to the audience and tell us a little bit about your professional background and what you do. And Jay, I'll start with you.
Great. Thanks, Tom. My name is Jay. I am the CEO and founder of Clausematch, which is a compliance and regulatory technology company. Started out of the UK, but now present across the globe. And we're here to talk about a great initiative that we started several years ago, but really to digitize and structure regulation and help regulators to innovate in the space.
Vlad?
Yeah, I'm head of data science at Clausematch. I've been working for 4 years in this field specifically, and prior to that, I've been working at Apple at OS personalization, regulates on consumer exposure. Prior to that, I've been in my university work, my very specific field, and thesis all about semantic linkage for law documents, for judicial documents. So I was extremely happy to join Clausematch 4 years ago to kind of continue my scientific as well work in this field.
Jay, I've had the privilege to interview you before about your work with Clausematch, but I was wondering for our new listeners if you could just give us a little highlight of what Clausematch is, who your customers are, and most importantly, what do you bring to the digital transformation world around compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started Clausematch to solve a pretty simple but boring, I guess, problem in compliance, and that is managing compliance documents and compliance content. I think we all know that compliance is still done in a extremely old way. We're managing compliance documents like policies, procedures, obligations, regulations in a standard way, like swapping files, asking for feedback on changes to policies via email. Approvals are done via email, and everything is tracked in spreadsheets. So with Clausematch, really, we tried to bring all of that workflow and content management under one platform and provide compliance professionals a way to collaborate on content in real time, run it through a workflow, keep the approvals, the audit trail, but also understand the data that sits within those documents. So practically, we help companies to create, structure, and understand the content they have in their compliance departments.
Well, gentlemen, I teased this topic at the start of this podcast, but I really want to spend most of this podcast talking about your new innovation recently announced on, and I'm going to make sure I read it to get it right, Digital Knowledge Graph in open source. I rarely get to use the word game changer, but after having reviewed the information, seen a couple of demos, I think you guys may have had a true game changer. So now that I've set you up, can you please tell us what the knowledge graph is and who does it serve?
So let me start with, from the kind of data point of view, knowledge graph consists of regulations and extracted concepts like different entities and relations between those entities, which forms the rules. All of that extracted by the machine learning models. So the whole graph is constructed automatically, and this is one of the key innovation to kind of build the whole thing to structurize and reorganize and structure the text. And the outcome for that is not just graph which will be inside the graph database, and therefore it will be like queryable by human and by people, and is available for different visualizations in the tool like Neo4j, but also it will serve for decision-making machine learning models as source of ground truth for the process of judgment automation. Whenever we need a model to make some kind of prediction or suggestion on compliance-related decision, we don't want there to be a black box, right? We need some kind of justification which we can trace and follow, and the knowledge graph allows that specifically for this field, as it provides a subgraph with the direct linkage to the initial text that will make possible the predictions to be explainable.
And how have you been working, or how long have you been trying to develop this knowledge graph, Vlad?
So the whole process took specifically my time. It was like a year. There was actually a lot of people involved. So they were all started with discussions with experts in the regulatory field from the who worked at regulators, as well as discussions and advising us on what the problem is and how we can approach that. And we form with them like a taxonomy. And then on my side, I have to work with DevOps and other teams to organize an infrastructure for data labeling process where like people who are experts can participate and prepare the data for the models to be trained, and then do the training. We did the evaluation and did the generalization of the outcomes, and then on top of that came up with approach of teaching all together in the graph. For me specifically, it was like a year of work, but there was actually a lot of people involved in different areas. It took us as well as a set of significant improvements for the Clausematch platform, as we've used that for the data labeling, and we added like a deep integration with our AI tools to be able to make this new invention to be possible.
Jay, if I could turn to you, people are always interested in the secret sauce. In America, we might say inside baseball. Perhaps in England, you say inside football. But without giving us the full secret sauce of Clausematch, how did you conceptualize this? Because it seems to me that one of the ways of innovation is to look at the same problem all of us look at and see a different solution. So you looked at a problem that I saw, but I didn't come up with a solution, and I couldn't. But you were able to conceptualize a solution, or at least start the process. Could you tell us a little bit about your process in that?
Absolutely. And Tom, I think this goes to the core of the idea behind Clausematch, because to me, the idea behind Clausematch was let's capture the data at the start when the data is created. When you create a text in a Word document, rather than creating it in a Word document, let's put it in a cloud platform in a database and allow a similar experience to create a document, but in a structured form. So I guess creating content in that way allows for a lot more to be done to that data. So at the core of the platform is creating documents, and then each paragraph has got its own entity, its own place in a database, which means that we started looking at how can we apply this in compliance. And then we got a lot of interest from regulators, because regulatory text is actually a structured text, and each paragraph can be a rule, a guidance, can be describing what you're expected to do. And then each paragraph in a regulation touches on a specific topic. And then whenever it gets updated, companies around the world which are regulated by a specific regulator, they want to know which part of regulation changed. So when we started speaking to regulators, primarily first it was FCA in the UK, and then ADGM, Abu Dhabi Global Markets Financial Services Regulator. And then ultimately there were also innovation programs in the UK where several regulators took part. And we presented them the platform where their regulations which we put on the platform were fully structured. And then we pitched them the idea that, hey guys, you can actually tag the text in the regulation through our platform, and then we'll apply machine learning and train our models with your expert work, with your taxonomy, with your regulations. And then the output of that would be a knowledge graph, which we can release in the open source. And then ultimately, the open source data, which has been tagged by experts and improved by the models which we've developed, can be used by other companies, by other regulators to actually apply the models, apply trained data set to their models. And then ultimately, what you have is a regulation that is fully structured, that can be automatically tagged by a machine. Then you can check it against the model that you applied to it.
Both of you guys have talked about the regulatory aspect of this and the regulators, but I think there's another component that makes this extremely exciting to me, and that's for financial institutions or your customers, perhaps. How can financial institutions or other companies or other customers adopt this tool so that they can keep fully abreast of what the regulators put into it?
Here is the amazing part, is that once you have the regulations completely fully structured and you have the entities and concepts linked in a graph database to those regulations, you can apply the same model to the internal compliance document. So let's say if I look at anti-money laundering, financial crime regulations, there are about 50 policies which are addressing this regulation. And then once you know which parts of regulations are obligations and you've got the entities, products, thresholds all tagged as concepts within those regulations, you also have the same concepts which translate into your internal governance documentation. So running the model against the regulations, but also against your internal compliance documents, you can map them automatically. And also you can understand where you have gaps, and also you can understand where you have contradictions. And that is possible today already. It's just we never had a structured way to deal with that data.
Let me turn to a couple of questions about digitization, because I don't want to say these are philosophical questions, but they move to a realm that really excites me to have a discussion. Number one is, how does the knowledge graph actually digitize the meaning of regulations? But more importantly, even if we have that philosophical discussion, by digitizing it, you've given the user and the user experience a new tool that they can now use in a variety of ways that perhaps they couldn't before. And so I wanted to ask you guys to talk about digitization and why this unifies regulation distribution as well.
I actually really love this one. It's amazing, exciting question. So the thing is, we tried with my own main realization from that project. So when we talk about the meaning in general and the meaning of the words and understanding, the discussion could become maybe too deep, but like in general, whenever we read the book and we understand something like outside, nothing changed. It's just like state of your brain kind of changed. So there is a state of the system which is changed, and that's how you get the interpretation of the meaning. So the thing is that it's kind of hard to capture this, the meaning itself, as it is defined by the state of the system which does the interpretation. So in that way, any system which does interpretation create a kind of self-sufficient reality where it's just a space of all possible states of this system. So when we go into a more practical field, we go ask regulators to look through their regulations and tell us and tell the models what is the rule here, what is the obligations, what are the activities or risk mitigations has to be taken. Regulators, they also like contains from people. So there are people in the room who has to decide about the very exact borders of the set of words which will define a mitigation or will define a financial activity. And when they discuss that and when they agree, they start to kind of do the tagging. And the model by learning this tagging, the model encapsulates the understanding of the regulator. And in the end of this process, we get the model which kind of get this average understanding of all of the experts inside the regulator. And this model, therefore, kind of carries the meaning of the regulations. And the realization is that right now regulators releases the rules in the regulations, but ideally they also have to release the models which will carry the understanding of those regulations, because understanding of the regulations is something which other companies have to produce for themselves by like assigning people or hiring people who will read all of this stuff. So instead of that, regulators could have released the model which will help anyone to get the understanding of the regulator inside their like own house. And this model will, by this kind of definition, capture the meaning of the regulations by the state of the model.
Let me see if I can maybe rephrase that of why I think this is such a dramatic development, and maybe even revolutionary might be a term. Years ago, a friend of mine, when I was first introduced to data and data analytics, said, Tom, we're looking for patterns in raked leaves. And this was around financial documents, travel and entertainment spend. But it occurs to me that with your digitization, you now give us, me, the user, an opportunity and an ability to look for patterns in raked leaves on regulations. So I can literally take regulations across the globe, put them into your model, and then I can see where I have gaps, or the regulations may be so close that what I have in place may satisfy multiple countries or multiple regulatory bodies. And then I can document that to the regulators. So if a regulator comes knocking and say, we want to see your policies on 1, 2, 3 or ABC, I have those in a documented format to be able to show them, here is the regulation, here is our response to the regulation, whether we had it in place or we've created it. Would that be a general fair assessment from a lawyer?
Yeah, I think largely the ultimate goal is that, yes, you've got regulations which are applicable to you, or maybe you don't even know if they're applicable to you, but the machine can tell you if they are or not. And then if you have products or services which are subject to that regulation, and ultimately if your internal policies, procedures, processes are compliant with any of the regulatory rules. I think we're getting much, much closer to that with releasing the knowledge graph and the structured data behind it. The reason why we're releasing it also in the open source is the fact that it will take years before regulators come to that weight of publishing regulations. We're still in the world where regulations are published as PDF documents through the website. And to get to a full kind of worldview where every regulation is structured, can be consumed via the API, can be run via the models, and automatically mapped to your internal governance, it will take years. But if we release it into open source and then other companies, regulators, take that data and start applying that data to their models, perhaps we'll get to that worldview much faster.
What happens next on your end, Jay?
On our end, well, we're continuing to work on the models. We're also implementing these models into our product. So not just regulations can be digitized and tagged with these models, but also internal compliance documents. And there is a lot of insight that you can get from internal compliance documents. Because when you look at for example, large bank and look at their universe of compliance documentation, these are thousands and thousands of documents which often need to be aligned with each other. And it's incredible once you understand how they link and map to each other. One single change can have an impact on many, many different areas within the organization. And we're trying to automate and digitize that part as well within the organization. So you actually know that you have all of your content aligned with each other. You understand the impact when something changes. And also you can see it in a visual way where you can look at a concept, let's say, I don't know, credit cards, and you can see everything that is linked to credit cards, what you're expected to do, whether it aligns with each other. And then if you make changes, you know that, okay, everything in the universe of credit cards is impacted by that change.
So let me ask you, how does Knowledge Graph fit into the world of compliance technology and your thoughts on how this product will help users see more compliance and less regulatory action or fines?
I would like to start with maybe listing some approaches from academia. So the compliance challenge was in a focus for more than 20 years, and there was a lot of approach around formalization of the rules and of the whole process. And the solution were often to build a formal system and abstract a formal compliance framework which will be consistent by design and by enforcing some algorithm, and then to manually convert the rules in the organization and in their processes, to convert those rules into that framework, and then to run algorithms on top of that and to prove or that everything is compliant or to find the gaps. So the issue with this kind of approach, or the thing which could be improved, better to say, is the fact that they were done manually. The idea was that you manually will converge your rules and fit into the framework. On our end, we see that actually it is possible to automate the process of the structuring data, and we will extract the entities and the obligations, and by doing that we allow the framework to emerge from the structured data. Once we have those expressions from the graph, we can then run on top of that graph neural network based model, or even in a form of reinforcement learning agent who will explore the graph structure and look for very specific patterns of compliance and non-compliance. So in terms of the technology, that should be the fit.
So, gentlemen, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but I was wondering if our listeners wanted any more information on the Knowledge Graph, on Clausematch, yourselves, or really any of the topics we've touched on in today's podcast, what would be the best place for them to go?
Yes, absolutely. You can find us on clausematch.com. We'll release the news on the website, but also we'll be releasing the Knowledge Graph on GitHub, I believe, Vlad.
That's correct. Also, we'll release the scientific paper, a case study regarding that. And in that paper, there will be also more details about the topic. Like, we probably didn't have time now to mention, but in brief, there is a principal flaw in the models like ChatGPT and the other language models which are based on correlation approach. When in the compliance field, we need causation, we need exact inference. And that's why the graph structure is extremely important to be able to build the automation for the compliance. So it will be described more in the paper.
Well, gentlemen, I wanted to thank you again for taking time to visit with me. I love going into the weeds. I love what you've done. Keep innovating and keep letting me tell your story. So thanks again, and I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you, Tom. We'll do our best.
If you want to stay up to date on the latest innovations in compliance and help your business run more efficiently, subscribe to this podcast and help spread the word by leaving a review.